but now there's nothing left to lose. And though I understand it's hard sometimes to make up your mind in these trying times, yeah, I just can't accept you leaving me when I'm overseas with the heart so heavy. Think that I deserve the truth for once, not a guilty tone, 'cause you're not alone, yeah. You said you wanna come home, but I know you don't. So this time I'll hear it on the phone. If you got something to say to me, then say it to my face. What it's all about, why you're bailing out. Think you owe me an apology. Just say it to my face. You're sorry. You're so sorry. You're so sorry. You're so sorry. Say it to my face. You're sorry. The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show.
Good morning and welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Morning Show. It is January 14th, Friday, January 14th, 2022. Thank you so much for joining us. If you feel as if the world is upside down, I think I've started a show like this before because the world is regularly upside down. You're not feeling that by yourself. If you feel like the people in charge are making all of the wrong decisions as it pertains to your life and the life and the well-being of your family and your children, you're not by yourself, because we are most certainly facing an upside down world where the sky is green and the grass must be blue, because the people who have power, the people who have charge over this country, seem to not care that we're quickly approaching 1 million people dead from COVID-19. In fact, the world is so upside down that those of us who are screaming at the top of our lungs for vaccine mandates, for mask mandates, those of us who are fighting for the basic things that would help prevent 1 million people from dying, those of us, we're labeled as the ridiculous ones. If you listen to Fox News, you listen to any of the conservative media, which runs this country. Let's be sure Fox News runs this country. They run this country so much so that Fox News was able to text message, anchors from Fox News were able to text message the president of the United States on January 6th, telling him whatever they wanted to. A matter of fact, they were able to text message with him long before that, helping set the agenda for this nation. That news media outlet would have you believe that everything is fine and that the only thing that's wrong in this country are those of us who are begging for mask mandates, because the people have been conditioned so much with propaganda, with foolishness, with ridiculousness, that we can't even get them to commit to wearing masks, let alone getting a vaccine. The fight against COVID-19 had a major setback last night as it pertains, or yesterday, from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court striking down President Biden's vaccine mandate for large employers. They still upheld one of the mandates for healthcare workers, but they struck down the strongest provision that would have, according to some estimates, helped save 6,500 lives. According to some estimates, the mandate that was just struck down by the Supreme Court would have saved about 6,500 lives over the next 6 months. Oh, but what is 6,500 lives to a country that's more obsessed with their quarterly profit margins than they are the well-being of their citizenry? There's no question about the things that I'm saying, right? There's no question about whether or not this country has chosen profits over people, conspiracy over common sense. I mean, I really feel like we're in the end game here. I feel like Dr. Strange. All of a sudden, I'm like, we have one shot at surviving the idiocy that is the conservative movement in this country. Don't get it twisted. I'm coming around the bend to talk about some Democrats in a minute, namely Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. But I got to start with the conservative movement in this country that has taken over 50 years to meticulously execute an assault on democracy, because progress is anathema to them. The very concept of progress is something that makes conservatives shudder in their feet, shudder in fear. I want to begin with the Supreme Court decision last night, as well as with the information on Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. I do want to hold their feet to the fire. I do understand that they are controlled opposition. I totally get that Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, they're there to be the foil, the fall guys or gals, the patsies, those who are going to, because their races are far enough away, right? And of course, with Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, we're talking about the filibuster. There's just all around, we have a complete crapshoot. I know that's not the right word to use there, but I'm trying my best not to describe this exactly as it is. This is BS. We can't get voting rights protected in this country, and we can't get people to get a vaccine that will save lives. So we're dealing with two absurdities at the same time. We're going to tackle both of them this morning. I want to start with the filibuster. It is dead on arrival. The changes that Joe Biden proposed to the filibuster is dead on arrival because of Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Also because of all the Republicans. But I'm sorry, our job, if you consider yourself to be not a Republican, I don't care if you're a full-fledged Democratic Party member in good standing. If you are a person who rejects the absurdity of the Republican Party, then you should be upset at Democratic politicians who refuse to do the bidding and to do the work of the American people. I mean, we can't even get them to support Joe Biden's plan, the Build Back Better plan. They are Democrats who are intentionally sabotaging the plans of the president of the United States. More importantly, they're sabotaging the well-being of the Democratic experiment as a whole. I want to take a listen to this first clip. As the Senate debated making the change, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell promised to make the Senate more inconvenient than anything in living memory if Democrats alter filibuster rules to pass voting rights. He cited infrastructure and hate crimes legislation as bipartisan achievements that would be threatened. Let's take a listen to Turtle McTurtley.
So what does that mean?
If my colleague tries to break the Senate to silence those millions of Americans, we will make their voices heard in this chamber in ways that are more inconvenient for the majority and this White House than what anybody has seen in living memory. Last year, the Senate passed major bipartisan legislation on infrastructure, on hate crimes, on government funding, on competing with China. Last year, senators helped speed through non-controversial nominations. So what would a post-nuclear Senate look like? I assure you it would not be more efficient or more productive. I personally guarantee it.
I personally guarantee that in the next 4 years, our next goal would be to get. Come on, are we really going to sit here and care what this man says when he has been the leading architect in the decline of this empire? Senate Majority Leader or Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has played the most critical role in the demise of this democratic experiment. He's the one that made sure that we had a conservative majority on the bench of the Supreme Court. Now, I am 38 hot with the Democratic Party for not fighting and going nuclear all the way back with Merrick Garland as a Supreme Court pick, because now here we are. We have Brett Kavanaugh and what's the other guy? It wasn't just Brett Kavanaugh. It was the other guy at the time. It'll come back to me momentarily. But the point is Mitch McConnell, while he's trying to make it seem as though he can make it worse than it already is, it is already bad. There's no threat that Mitch McConnell can make that should make anyone more fearful of what we currently have. And let me say that again. What is happening in this country right now is sufficient enough for us to never be concerned about what the chief architect of this madness has to say, Mitch McConnell. Anyway, it's not just Mitch McConnell, however. Mitch McConnell's on one side of the Republican Party trying to mastermind his way into a theocratic, Christo-fascist regime. But you also have Donald Trump and his allies. His loyalists are forming an alliance in a bid to take over the election process in key states. Now, we know this is happening here in the state of Georgia. We know that in the Secretary of State position, Donald Trump is trying to run one of his loyalists. Well, it's not only in the state of Georgia, all around the country, they are attempting to take over the key election functions of states that are critical to winning in 2024. Let's take a listen to this. A little bit more information on this is that in key states, they have a coalition of America First Secretary of State candidates. This is what's happening across the country. There's a list of America First Secretary of State candidates. And this is, of course, disclosed by Jim Marchin, who is running for Secretary of State in Nevada. I mean, we have an all-out full court press against democracy, not only by the Trump faction of the Republican Party, but by the establishment portion of the Republican Party. And to add insult to injury, the Democrats that we did everything that we possibly could to get in power. The Democrats that I personally helped and took it on the chin in order to make sure that we won the state of Georgia. We personally got on the ground and helped Ossoff and Warnock win the state of Georgia and Biden win the state of Georgia in the general election. And yet and still, we can't get the people who have the power from the people to stand up for us because, oh, well, there's nothing we could possibly do about Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin to get rid of the filibuster to protect voting rights. I'm sorry. Before I play this clip of Kyrsten Sinema, I got to ask the Democratic Party a question. How the hell do you expect black people to come in and save you every 2 to 4 years when you don't even protect the black people's right to vote? Brown people's right to vote, marginalized communities' right to vote. There's nothing that we can do. So when Democrats lose in 2022 and 2024, it won't be because the people aren't trying to do our job. It's because Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are blocking everybody else from doing theirs. Let's listen to Kyrsten Sinema as she discusses how she is going to stand on the side of democracy and not do a damn thing to help us protect our right to vote. Let's run that clip.
These bills help treat the symptoms of the disease, but they do not fully address the disease itself. And while I continue to support these bills, I will not support separate actions that worsen the underlying disease of division infecting our country. The debate over the Senate's 60-vote threshold shines a light on our broader challenges. There's no need for me to restate my long-standing support for the 60-vote threshold to pass legislation. And there's no need for me to restate its role protecting our country from wild reversals in federal policy.
Sounds good. Sounds so convincing. One of the things you have to understand about a Karen is that they have the ability to feign sincerity. That's the key thing that you have to look for in a Karen whenever you're under attack. America's under attack by a Karen, a sub-mediocre Karen by that measure. They have the ability to put on a tone and an air of sincerity, like, I don't have to repeat again that it's a 60-vote threshold for me. It wasn't a 60-vote threshold for you back in 2010, Kyrsten Sinema. Here she is advocating for the use of reconciliation in the Senate before she was a senator. Run the clip.
So what does that mean? Well, in the Senate, we no longer have 60 votes. Some would argue that we never had 60 because one of those was Joseph Lieberman. But that's whatever. And Nelson too, but really Lieberman. So now there's, I think as the president so eloquently said on Wednesday, there's none of this pressure, this false pressure to get to 60. So what that means is that the Democrats can stop kowtowing to Joe Lieberman and instead seek other avenues to move forward with health reform. And so it's likely that the Senate will move forward with a process called reconciliation, which takes only 51 votes. And by the way, is not unusual. You may recall that before the Democrats took the Senate in 2008, that the Republicans controlled the Senate for quite some time. In fact, since around 1994, they never had 60 votes, and they managed to do a lot of really bad things during that time. So the reconciliation process is still quite available, and we will use it for good rather than for evil.
She's so funny. She's so witty. She's so well informed. She's so completely and totally aware of the fact that she's full of shit as it pertains to the American people and the right to vote, and the filibuster being a false barrier to accomplishing that right and protecting that right. Kyrsten Sinema knows exactly what she's doing. She said everything that she needed to say to get the support of progressives in Arizona to get her elected. And as soon as she got there, well, now, if you look at her, I do believe she's taken money from Republican donors. We know that for a fact for Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin has a regular call with Republican billionaires, a particular Republican billionaire, every single week to get an encouraging word to say, keep up the good work. Google it. Joe Manchin is serving the Republican Party. Kyrsten Sinema is serving the Republican Party, and they are convenient foils for Democrats who really don't want to do anything. I'm sorry. You can whip 2 votes into shape, Joe Biden. That's nothing for the president of the United States. Donald Trump whipped every single Republican into shape when he wanted to get his policy agenda accomplished. And the only thing I've heard from Joe Biden as it pertains to Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin is, I don't know if we're going to be able to overcome it, guys. Meanwhile, the fascists on the right are gathering up everything they possibly can in order to overthrow this democracy. We can't win when we have a belligerent cabal of Christo-fascists on one side of the equation, willing to break every part of this democracy in order to accomplish their agenda. And then on the other side of the equation, you have Karen. And you have Joe Biden, who's like, I can't possibly whip Joe Manchin into shape and Kyrsten Sinema into shape. Well, here's a collection of all the rest of the Democrats, including Raphael Warnock, President Biden, and Steny Hoyer, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, discussing the filibuster. Let's take a listen in.
We need to get rid of the filibuster. The filibuster was never contemplated by the founders. The founders absolutely believed that the Senate, like the House, would operate by majority rules. That's the basis of our democracy, the majority rules. You protect the minority against abuse by the majority, but you don't protect the minority to the extent that they take over, that they control, that the minority is in control, not the majority. That's not democracy.
The state of Georgia is ground zero for these voter suppression bills that we're seeing emerge all across the country. This is a defining moral moment. It is the most important thing we can do this Congress.
You all ask questions about complicated subjects like, can you get this done? I hope we can get this done. The honest to God answer is, I don't know whether we can get this done. One thing for certain, like every other major civil rights bill that came along, if we missed the first time, we could come back and try it a second time. We missed this time. And the state legislative bodies continue to change the law, not as to who can vote, but who gets to count the vote. Count the vote. Count the vote. It's about election subversion, not just whether or not people get to vote. Who counts the vote? That's what this is about. That's what makes this so different than anything else we've ever done. I don't know that we can get it done, but I know one thing. As long as I have a breath in me, as long as I'm in the White House, as long as I'm engaged at all, I'm going to be fighting to change the way these legislatures have moving. Thank you.
Pastor Anthony Galloway, as always on Fridays, joining us. How are you this morning, Pastor? I don't have his.
I'm good.
Awesome, man. Listen, so glad that you could join us. There is a lot to parse here, and you're here in the middle of the conversation, but you're well abreast of everything that's going on. The filibuster is here to stay. Yeah. Black folks, and particularly targeted by the voter suppression tactics across the state. But President Biden makes a good point here that it's not just the voter suppression. It's also the people who are counting the votes. We're seeing that's a concerted effort by Republicans all around this country to change the secretaries of states. Here's the thing. Lyndon B. Johnson wouldn't be this angry on camera. He'd be this angry on the phone with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, as best as memory as history has taught me. What are your thoughts as to the threat that President Biden just outlined, which is 100% accurate, in my opinion, versus the kind of response that we're getting from his leadership?
Well, a lot of times, we sit in this space and voting is supposed to be this thing that we push towards opening as welcoming as possible, right? And so I think there's some flat-footedness being caught here because that central thrust, that central core belief is not true, and it's largely centered around the fact that I can scare folks in talking on the right into thinking that something is threatened that there isn't, right? And so folks are caught in a logic quandary because I'm trying to use logic to address something that is illogical, all right? And so I think there's a tactic issue here, and then to your point, right? We have a historical example of taking this stance and saying, oh no, we gonna bully whip this thing. We gonna put all this maneuvering pressure, but that maneuvering pressure, Lyndon Baines Johnson, all these other folks, there's a logic to the political strong arm, right? That I'm going to use all those different tactics. I don't know that those skills, those tactics work against something like this in the same way. And so that's one of the things that's challenging me right now is, regardless of the political maneuvering that tries to keep folks in line and all those kinds of things, I'm not sure that logic-based tactics work in this regard. I'm not sure that for Senators Manchin and Senator Sinema that the resistance here is a logic-based or political maneuvering-based situation.
So the resistance you're saying is not logic-based. Then What do you think it is? Let's just start there. What do you, if it's not, and I don't necessarily disagree with your assertion there, that what would work with Lyndon B. Johnson probably won't work with these two. Why do you not think it would work?
Well, because there's something else for me to run behind, right? When you look at what was happening with Lyndon Baines Johnson, right? There was these issues that folks had worked on, very familiar with all these close to home things. There's these leverage strings that Lyndon Baines Johnson is able to pull. I mean, shoot, even in a Reagan situation, right? There's these home-based things that are local based that I can say, you know what, I helped you with this thing, or I know that you really want this, package or structure bill for something that's a local issue that you can rally behind, right? Mm-hmm. That's not the fight that's happening now, right? This the parties are looking much more at this national identity space, not the local space. And so the balance between what I look like publicly for supporting or not supporting this is very different. Because I can't just say, well, I'm gonna get whipped into shape because there's something I want to protect at home. And that's fine. That's going to work. If I make that choice in our current environment, I might be making a choice to end my political space because I'm not towing these big giant party line spaces. So it's the local leverage point that I think is one of the big pieces that are striking me about this being different. And so that's where it's hard for me to say, whip your folks into shape, because what leverage points are you going to pull? They're all public. They're all front line.
They got to go. One, I think they exist. They certainly exist. There's enough funding. There's enough pork belly in any of these pieces of legislation that I know Joe Manchin has his hand out somewhere along the lines. I can't believe that there are no levers that Joe Biden cannot pull to put pressure on the two of them in particular. I do agree, however, with the national identity component that you're speaking of, because the funding that is supporting Joe Manchin, the funding that is supporting Kyrsten Sinema, is not coming from West Virginia. It's coming from outside of the state. And so they have all the money they would ever need to survive political challenges, because that money is not coming from their constituents in the first place. So in that regard, I would say, the political challenge, financial challenge, is definitely one that's not local, but there's got to be levers. There's definitely levers that they can pull on. And if there are not any, he needs to create them, because here we are in a situation where if Joe Biden honestly believes that we're talking about the whole of democracy here, which I believe we are, then not having the pressure points, then what do we send him up there for? As Cliff Albright from Black Voters Matter would say, like, we sent somebody up there who had 40 years experience in the Senate. You got to know where the pressure points are.
Well, I think I really think that's an excellent point, right? This is definitely coming into political skill space. I mean, politics requires, certain skill spaces, and for somebody like Joe Biden, you've been in there for a while. It would behoove us to believe that you picked up some tricks and skills of the trade in this regard. I also would offer, and I'm saying it just purely political, political analysis kind of thing, right? Because I've my issues with the Democratic Party, my issues with all parties in general, and what's happening in this current echo chamber. But one of the things that is in the back of my mind, again, just wondering, is if this might be one of those tools. Oh, well, it looks like we don't have the votes that are here, and it's these two's fault. Might be garnering some particular calls and drawing some lines here. The hard part is what's at stake, connecting to our history, connecting to the experiences. I mean, I have folks in my church community vote many different ways, right? This is not a monolithic voting space that my parishioners, but they're concerned clearly across party lines, across viewpoints. I've got conservative, evangelical, progressive. That we're a big tent church, right? And so one of the challenges that's coming up here is that folks are starting to starting to wonder about the future of just being the future of voting rights in such a way that is diminishing their trust in the voting system, not in the same way that the January 6th insurrectionists did, but just in general, like, oh, well, this institution doesn't seem like it's going to survive because they keep getting news like this. We can't coalesce, especially around something like the filibuster, which has its racist histories and origins in the first place. That's right. And as your clip spoke to, was never intended by the founders to be a thing in the first place.
That's right. Absolutely right. And speaking of the history of it, coming up at the 8:30 hour, we are going to be going through that history. We have a 3-part clip from our friends over at The Recount that breaks down the racist history of the filibuster and the fact that it is not constitutional, but it is in addition to it is a rule. It's a Senate rule that they make up, and they have the ability to change. We'll be talking about that coming up in the next few minutes. Matter of fact, I didn't realize we're so close to the end of the half-hour mark. Pastor Galloway, thank you for joining us, and I know you'll be staying past the break. Coming up, Georgia Ford is going to be joining us for On the Clock, and we're going to be hanging out a little bit for Like It or Not. Good morning to everyone. Before we go to break, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, hit the share, like, subscribe button, and say good morning to someone in the chat room. It is the Benjamin Dixon Morning Show. We'll be back right after this.
Good morning, people. Y'all know the voice, y'all know the sound. It's the DJ Exclusive James. Bubba Mac DJ Exclusive. Who the hell is DJ Exclusive? I don't know who that is. Dwayne, you know who that is? Good morning, everybody. Good morning, y'all. Come on in. Get this way to get settled. Get your coffee, get your drink. Whatever it is, get your morning started. Exclusive. Is it the
Get on with it. Come on, get on with it. Come on, get on with it. Come on, get on with it. It's what I say.
Everybody, good morning. Nicole Johnson, One Source Productions. Brother Chuck Diesel.
It's what I say.
Hollywood Diesel. Kristen Lionheart, good morning. Ryan, good morning. G-Man, Sip City Socialist, Iris Jones. Tiger, what's going on? Church Lady Shelby Hall, good morning, y'all. I see y'all here. Shoot the Dragon, Muffin Stuff. Mark S, what's going on? Tyler, what's going on, Brother Tyler? Angela Newman, Nikki Cruz, thank you for your super chat. Being going off this morning. Peace to the family. Amen to that. Melanie Dennis, Amber G, good morning, everybody. Kev Z, what's going on, brother? Y'all come on in, get situated, get settled, man. Afraid Not, what's going on? One Lost Spirit, what's going on, man? Good to see everybody this morning. I hope y'all had a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend, holiday, and everything else. Hope y'all ate good and all that good stuff, man. Watch some good TV. Got some Black Friday shopping done, all of that good stuff, man. Y'all come on in and get situated, y'all. Good morning, the Benjamin Dixon Show, y'all. Stay tuned. Lily, good morning. Track Natasha, Roller Dragon, what's going on? A.R. Walker, Deb, what's going on? Kareem, Dragon Ball, super dope. Good morning. Happy belated birthday to Church Lady. Brenda Johnson, good morning. F8L Flaw Dragon, good morning. Patty P, good morning, Patty. Sonny Wright, what's going on? Ricky, good morning, y'all. Y'all y'all stay tuned, man. We got more coming up next. Y'all make sure y'all stay tuned. Amber Layla, good morning, Amber. Hey, Miss Sophia, good morning. Susan, good morning to you, Susan.
And maybe I just wanna let it shine. There is no good or better. I think tonight I'm gonna make it mine. I stepped out, stepping on next. Little baddie, cashing big checks. I bought the whole block out, now that's a
Nicole
big
Johnson, why are you jealous, Nicole?
Like what's next? Got new levels and new devils out the wazoo. Ain't no worries, life gets better when you find you. And if you mind you, peace will abide.
Esther Brochen, good morning.
Time to start anew. So live it up, we grown, ain't got no curfew. Who brought the
Ricky, good morning to you. Stephanie Rampley, good morning.
That's a bitch move. Press that I arrive, mad that I survive. All your sad attempts to send me to the sky. But I've been in the wind, been had wings. I was always this fly. Oh yes, and that's probably why you're mad. Don't let Evie turn you into a trash bag. So get glad, find out why you sad. All that jealousy, you should
Tasia, good morning.
I think it's time to turn that mirror on you. Put it up close for a clear view. And look deep down inside. And soon you will find a pretty soul that needs more shine.
Nicole Johnson, you know I still love you.
Come together. And maybe I just wanna let it shine.
Brother Lateef, what's going on, Lateef?
No good or better. I think tonight I'm gonna make it mine. 1, 2, mean right hook. Come and test me, my mom deep will have
Vegeta, good morning.
It's a marathon, but baby girl never
Vegeta.
let up. No need for
Goku.
speed, but keep your
And then
foot
I got
on
the
the
Dragon
gas
Ball.
pedal. Ain't worried
That's
about
crazy.
winning the golden award. When God made me to be an ice cold medal. Why are you always pressed about my life? Talking with your frenemies about me, saying, ooh girl, have you seen it like the shy lights? You tried, but you could never dim my life.
Shoot the dragons, go to sleep.
I'm untouchable girl. I'll slip through your fingers like a real fly kite. Why you wanna
Brother Lateef, I realized this morning that I was out of coffee.
Take that bad energy and go and get your mind right. Say a prayer tonight.
That's gonna be a long one, but that's okay. We gonna make it through.
You in the big
Definitely gotta make sure I get my ass some coffee though today.
Controlling that drama. I put the work in. Now I got the big bags that you call Birkin.
It get a nine. What's going on?
My world has come together. And maybe
Church lady, I got you. I did get a chance to hear some of it.
there is no good or better. I think tonight I'm gonna make it.
Tyra G, good morning.
My world has
Susan, I see.
and maybe
One Such Productions, right. Cancel everything. I have no coffee. The whole canister is completely empty. I'll be brewing brown water right now from the grinds that's left probably from last week. Who knows? It Get a Nine, missed you as well, too, man. I think we are ready to come back. The song had ran out on me. Look at that. All right, y'all go ahead and roll that intro, y'all. Y'all welcome back to the screen, my brother from another mother, Benjamin Dixon, y'all. Let's get it. Let's go. The Benjamin Dixon Show.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show.
Welcome back, everybody. It's the Benjamin Dixon Morning Show. It's Friday, January 14th, 2022. There are so many stories that we have to cover, so many miles that we have to go. The history of the filibuster. Sometimes we believe that something has been here permanently. It really hasn't. Let's discuss that and so much more. We're on the clock with Georgia Ford.
Good morning and TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. I normally do not work on Fridays, but here I am, Ben. You got me out the bed at 7 a.m. Central Time. And so, it's Friday. Thank God it's Friday.
I do want to say, first and foremost, good morning, Georgia. And good morning again, Pastor Galloway. It's been a minute since the three of us have shared a screen together. In fact, I think it might have been the very first week of On the Clock. I do want to say thank you, Georgia, for coming in on a Friday. We're adjusting schedules and whatnot, so I don't take it lightly.
Yeah, no, not a problem at all. And especially because my brother is here, Anthony. We haven't had a chance to connect in the new year. So happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Well, I know that there's a couple of stories that I have been itching to get Pastor Galloway's information and take on. We've already started that process. We were talking about the filibuster at the top of the show. It's been an eventful night, Georgia. So many things transpired just yesterday that I think are critical to democracy. One of them being the fact that Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin have made it clear that they're not going to go with Joe Biden on amending the filibuster. We're not even talking about doing away with it totally. They were asking for a carve out, make a specialist exception to the filibuster in order to protect voting rights. Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin have said no. Before we get to the history of the filibuster, I know you've been following this. We've been covering this like nonstop. Did you expect anything different from Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin at this point? Or is this just like, you kind of expected this to happen?
I'll let Anthony go ahead. But for me, no, this is exactly what I expected from them.
Pastor Galloway.
It's just, yes. Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the toughest pills to swallow in it is the fact that, again, it's rooted in the public show, not in the actual, policy implications. Both of them are in spaces where into the voter, an increase in voter rights would actually, this is the confusing part for me, would actually probably be beneficial for them in their keeping of their seats and adding, access to the voters and increasing the voting population. I think this enshrines against them. And so I can't, and I said this earlier, I can't see the logic in here, which leads me to believe that these aren't logic-based decisions. And so that's one of the toughest parts for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah, I honestly, well, you know what? I heard you say that in the first block. That part got by me. Let's talk about that part coming up in a few minutes. Don't let that portion go. That this isn't a logic-based decision on their part, because I see what you mean there. Everything feels so irrational right now. Everything seems like they're operating on a different set of rules than common sense and logic. So I want to get to that. But first, I want us to take a look at this first clip from the Recount. Our friends over at the Recount, they put together a pretty succinct summary. I know most of us know the history of the filibuster, but for those who may not know, that the filibuster is not a part of the Constitution, and it is a Senate rule that can be changed. But more importantly, listen to the history of the beginnings of the filibuster. Let's take a listen to the first part.
Even as Democrats hold unified control of D.C. for the first time since 2010, a cornucopia of liberal priorities, from voting rights to gun safety, are on hold, maybe permanently. The barrier? Mitch McConnell's favorite weapon, the filibuster, and promises from some moderate Democrats that they will protect the Senate rule in the name of bipartisanship. We all know the common arguments for the filibuster. It's part of the Senate's design, it gives a voice to the minority, it promotes working together, but for starters, the filibuster was actually created by mistake. In 1805, Vice President Aaron Burr told senators their rules were redundant, so they axed the one allowing them to end debate, opening the door to the earliest filibuster. But it wasn't for 30 more years that the first one actually occurred. There were only a handful between 1837 and 1917, when the first filibuster reforms passed.
So I think that's the first thing that the people really need to understand is that a lot of times we hear words that seem arcane, they seem permanent, they seem official. The filibuster, when people hear that, Georgia and Pastor Galloway, they really believe that we're working against an institution that is as important as the Constitution, when in fact it is not only not a part of the Constitution, but it is a rule that the senators get to come up with together. I think that's, unfortunately, that's some important context that helped lead us to this kerfuffle, because they're hiding, they being Republicans and Sinema and Manchin, they're hiding behind this idea that the filibuster is so sacred that we can't touch it. I want to go to you first, Pastor Galloway.
Well, I think, one of the things that needs to be important and realize is that the practice of the filibuster is one that was used by segregationists to keep that moving, right? There's these important uses throughout history. I think it also behooves us to understand that there was a bipartisan move to end the filibuster in the 60s, and it was used by Governor George Wallace in his bid for president to campaign against as a sale to get into positional power. And so I think it's very important that we were on the same page. The vote was going to happen. And then segregationists, again, led by George Wallace, the patron saint of segregationists, worked a campaign to keep the filibuster in place, not for any other reason, but to have a foil to work with for his political gain. There was bipartisan. It was the filibuster was all but dead until it was resurrected in that space by Governor Wallace. Now, that's an oversimplification of what happened, but he led the charge in that regard. So this idea that it's sacred, that I like the way that you put that, this idea that it's sacred needs to be debunked, because it hasn't been sacred. In fact, it's been a tool used by folks, in particular as the Black community is concerned, has been a tool to block and keep power as the moral arc of the country continues to move away from these particular thought spaces. I'll also offer that in the illogic conversation piece, that history is on full blast here. As long as I can get the minority leader of the Senate to keep using the filibuster, then I don't have to take a vote on something that is monumental. Right? I don't have to be public. This is also something that mirrors some of that history, because I can hide behind certain views that I can see are becoming uncouth. And I don't have to draw a party line, which would make me then have to contend with that same mentality. George Wallace, one of the things that we don't talk about often is that, as long as he could deliver for this one particular mentality, he was fine. But when he was forced to have to make decisions that actually didn't go along or would upset these folks, that the segregationists that were so behind him, he did everything in his power to try to maneuver away from that. So this again, there's a lot of things that mirror that history that are problematic with the filibuster.
Absolutely. Yeah, and to be clear here, Manchin and Sinema want you to think that this is a part of the Constitution and that you can't do anything about it. And the reason being is because the filibuster serves their agenda. And unfortunately, their agenda does not serve the people. And so when you have orders coming down from the president himself saying that we need to do away with this, and then that's followed up by a public op-ed published by the former president, you look at this, all roads are leading to what's best for America, what is best for the people in this country. And once Manchin and Sinema's constituents speak out, or if they're even listening, that is really what should be leading the decisions that they're making. But unfortunately, it's not. And so what we really need to address here is the fact that we have politicians who are in office who are moving by their own accord, moving by their own personal political agendas, and not what's best for the people that they're serving.
Absolutely. I want to skip a little and go to a clip of Dr. King. And it was shared by Senator Nina Turner, friend of the show. And he was talking about the usage of the filibuster in the exact way that you were both just mentioning, all the way back in 1963. So I want people to understand that this is a game that has been played Well, since at least Dr. King, let's take a listen to this clip.
The tragedy is that we have a Congress with a Senate that has a minority of misguided senators who will use the filibuster to keep the majority of people from even voting.
Pastor Galloway.
Well, I think, if you remember, a few years back, there was a conversation about this change because there is a concern, right? Because of the way that we switch in midterm spaces, we get rid of this now, but if we shift in the next election, then this tool isn't there for Democrats to be able to use to hold and block, things that may be coming out there. So there is that concern. I also think it's interesting here that when Dr. King was talking, the filibuster was even different than it is now. Right now, you have a paper file filibuster.
That's right.
But back in Dr. King's day, you had to hold the floor. You had to line up people to speak at length. And again, that would be highly public. One of the reasons that the filibuster is able to be used as much as it is because it's just a piece of paper that somebody signs and puts forward. It doesn't require there to be public spectacle of holding up that thing, which I think wouldn't work in Mitch McConnell's favor as well. So just looking at that machination, I think that that is yet again a little departure about what we have now. And so, it's frustrating to see that we're fighting the same thing that we see and around voting rights. That's the other really striking piece about the clip you just shared. He's speaking in regards to voting rights and folks holding up voting rights legislation with the filibuster. What are we doing now? Folks are holding up a debate on voting legislation to protect the vote and voting rights. The history connections are striking.
Striking, to say the least. Sister Court.
Well, what is bringing up for me, last night I watched the second part of the documentary on Emmett Till. And last week was very powerful. This week, what really stood out to me was the two men who killed Emmett Till, even though they were never convicted of it. They went to a magazine, Look magazine, and they did a piece about basically how they got away with murder. And one of the men openly admits it, and he starts going into his thought process of why. And in a rant using the N-word several times, one of the things he points out is in his state, won't no ends be able to vote. That he wasn't going to give up that kind of power, and that he was willing to take a stand in order for those Chicago boys to know where his people stood. And, the thing I think that's hard, especially for generations who are younger than us, especially as they're entering classrooms that are criticized for teaching this kind of history, that history gets lost. And so the context gets lost.
That's right.
And the fact that we are living in a nation that is repeating the same, cycles of political violence over and over and over again. And, the question that I truly hope, obviously, Sinema and Manchin aren't going to think about this, but other political leaders should really think about is how can they use their political power to interrupt these cycles? Otherwise, we can look at the textbooks. We know what's going to happen because history is literally repeating itself. We're living in the middle of this cycle.
Yeah, no, we really are. And I kind of want to jump off there and just have that conversation. But I have one more clip that I need to put into the conversation. And actually, I need to circle back to the Oath Keepers clip. In the backdrop of everything that's happening with the filibuster and voting rights, we have a very active opposition that marched all the way up the steps of the Capitol on January 6th. That opposition is organized. They have their factions. They have their subdivisions. They have their flanks, the Proud Boys, the Boogaloo Boys, the 3 Percenters, and the Oath Oath Keepers. And finally, the leader of the Oath Keepers was found guilty last night, if I'm not mistaken. Let's run this clip. I want to get all the details first as we discuss all of the structured organizations that were a part of January 6th. Let's take a listen in.
January 6th now, a militia group had stashes of guns on the outskirts of D.C. ready to go on that fateful day during the insurrection. That's just one of the alarming allegations from the Justice Department today after the feds charged the leader and several members of the right-wing group, the Oath Keepers, with seditious conspiracy. That'll ring a bell. Here's the leader, Stuart Rhodes. He's a former Army paratrooper with a law degree from Yale. The FBI arrested him today. Federal investigators say the Oath Keepers had what they called quick reaction force teams stationed just outside the Capitol and the nation's capital on January 6th. Their job? To rapidly transport guns into the city as needed to stop the peaceful transfer of presidential power. The Oath Keepers also had teams on the ground at the Capitol who used a military-style stack formation to force their way into the building. You can see them here walking through the mob in formation, single file line, holding on to the militia member in front of them. The Department of Justice alleges they had paramilitary gear, knives, batons, camouflaged combat uniforms, tactical vests with plates, plus helmets and eye protection. In an interview with the New York Times over the summer, that very man, Rhodes, claimed he and some of the Oath Keepers had gone off their mission, and there were zero instructions from him or the group's leadership to enter the Capitol building. The government reports it has some evidence to the contrary.
And what the government says is that as early as 2 days after the election, he began messaging his team saying that they needed to prepare for violence to try to stop the vote count and prevent Joe Biden from formally being elected president, and that he repeated this and amped it up in the months that followed, eventually coming to Washington on January 6th, but not entering the Capitol. And another new thing here, Shep, is they say that after the January 6th siege of the Capitol, he continued to plan for violence, continued to message his supporters, and spent $17,500 himself buying weapons.
Obviously a correction on my part. I'm ambitiously hoping he would be found guilty, but he was charged. But the most important part of that clip, Pastor Galloway, to me, is how regimented and how organized and how prepared they were for a whole lot more than just marching up those steps.
This is a hard this is a hard thing to wrap your mind around, because this is the concerning piece of some of our interactions. On last week, I spoke at a rally for voting rights with the League of Women Voters and several bipartisan and nonpartisan groups. Just wanting to call attention to that and to denounce the actions of January 6th. That was a Thursday. Later that night on January 6th, I'm out shoveling snow in the front of the church, and a car full of knuckleheads comes by and yells, "N-words are taking over everything," as I'm shoveling in the front of this historic Black church in Duluth, Minnesota. And parishioners, as they heard about this, it activated everybody. And I said, wait, no, those aren't the folks. If you are calling and naming that or calling that out from your car driving by, you're not saying it to my face. That's not the thing that should be concerning, right? And it was interesting that my Black parishioners were like, yeah, that's not the MO, right? What I'm more worried about is what we just saw. These organized folks who are trying to juice themselves up to actually do something and now we see the evidence of that, right? But we also see, what was interesting for me is if you see that clip when he was talking about that stack formation, you see that one lone sign, Blacks for Trump. This is one of the ways in which it wraps itself. Oh man, wraps itself in its own thing, right? And just to tie it all together, in Letter to a Birmingham Jail, King talks about being stuck, right? It was he's leveling this critique against white Christians and white Christian clergy in particular, right? He says, I'm stuck between multiple factions. On one side, I got folks ready to go, head to head in this piece because there is no avenue to work through systems to get things done. And on the other side of me, I've got folks who've been so water beat into submission that they either have given up hope that there is any possibility of change, or they have joined a middle class that has somehow figured out how to benefit from our current situation and aren't getting into the fight. And then there's folks who are where we are with these coalitions of Southern Christian Leadership Council and others. And I'm paraphrasing, right? It's about midway through the book as he levels that critique. But in that space, you've got not only you have organized groups that are doing this thing. There was organized groups that radicalize folks like Dylan Roof and other folks into action, as if there's some kind of thing or threat or of loss. If you again take as a student of history what has happened, this is the same kind of fervor in organizing that led to a very bloody stretch in which 3 workers were disappeared in Mississippi, in which we had this uptick in violence towards folks. And then, of course, we've also spoken to Emmett Till, right? It looks and feels very similar, according to many. My grandmother talks about that. My aunts, they were in a conversation just the other day, kind of laying out how similar some of these machinations look. And they're from Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, all these different places. And so I think this is the thing that is concerning, but it's not surprising. That's the hard part. We knew that these groups were on the rise. I got bulletins at the church talking about these groups being on the rise. And so yet again, here's another example for me of us not paying attention to the real possibility of folks doing what they were planning to do. So this is the hard part, and it's a big piece of stick in the eye to see the Blacks for Trump sign while a military group, paramilitary group, is in formation, walking through the space. I mean, some of those evidence should have clicked for whoever's holding that sign.
Absolutely, Sister Forward.
Well, and I think it's largely because the people who could do something about it are also a part of it. And that is something that came out, after they started investigating what happened on January 6th, is that some of these men who participated in January 6th were a part of the military. Some of them worked for local police departments across the country. And so historically, the people who we should be able to call when we don't feel safe and we need protection, or to investigate these hate groups that are organizing the next January 6th attack, we can't call them. Or if we do call them, we're calling the very people who are participating in it. And so, I am curious to know, what is the federal government going to do with that information? The people who were a part of the military and local police departments across our country who participated in January 6th, because to me, that is where this organizing gets even more dangerous. We're not in a position where we can call our local law enforcement agencies to intervene, because we learned through these investigations that there's individuals in law enforcement agencies across this country participating. And so what does that tell you? So I think that, at some point, either on a very basic level of citizens who are concerned about this, there needs to be a coalition or some organization to intervene here, because right now it feels as though our nation is allowing these hate groups to continue cultivating their plans and continue organizing. And what is that going to lead to? Even if it's not a mass demonstration like we saw on January 6th, it could be a series of other organized attacks in a manner similar to what Pastor Galloway just outlined, where you have people missing, or you have babies who are just being shot in the head point range in urban cities across the country. What does that really look like? These hate groups are dangerous. They don't care about our democracy. They do not respect our federal government. And what's being done? What's being done about that? Because right now, as it stands, it feels like they're still allowed to continue organizing. It's not illegal. There hasn't been any law that's been created or enforced, for that matter, to prevent these hate groups from continuing, or should I call them terrorist groups, from continuing to organize, and parallel this to the KKK. Let's talk about what laws were created in order for the KKK to be considered illegal. Did that ever happen? Were they ever considered a terrorist group, or were they allowed to continue organizing and continuing to plan hateful, violent, deadly attacks against Black Americans? Because I think that if you look historically, this nation has historically shown a tolerance for that type of hateful behavior. And correct me if I'm wrong, Pastor Galloway, but I don't recall any laws or anything that was legally put in place to intervene in the KKK from continuing to plan deadly attacks against Black Americans.
Not to my knowledge, and even worse, in some cases, in defense against their existence as an organization, we actually saw KKK groups try to put on the mask or don the mask of religiosity. So I get together with each other and we call ourselves a KKK group, but to the outward kind of publicity side, we are a Christian men's group who's gathering in the woods in our sheets. So we've seen ways folks try to wiggle around that machination, but also for these KKK light groups, right, where I change the name because I can try to distance myself from that history. One of the things that I think is not being paid attention to, and I keep coming back to Dylan Ruth only because the attack on Mother Emanuel had itself a historical context. I mean, that is the gathering place where Denmark Vesey was gathering folks, allegedly, putting together a revolt in a time when there was legislation that required that if you were going to have a religious meeting, there had to be a white person present. Right. And so the fact that organizing was happening and threatening to go beyond just Black folks to build interracial coalition against some of the policies that were happening there that folks used and tried to call the slavery vote in order to garner the ire and the mob to go and kill them, burn down the church, the AME church rebuilt that church. So Mother Emanuel was a symbol that Dylan Ruth attacked. Right. Dylan Ruth got that training from somewhere. And that's the thing that gets me, even beyond the organizing and the finding of weapons. These are the folks who are radicalizing folks, young folks in particular, who are in this very vulnerable space. And I've talked about that before. Some of them I have to work with on a regular basis. And I thank goodness that we had connection and they had a counter narrative to go along with what they were being fed by groups like this, who are weaponizing not only the weapons, but they're weaponizing this mentality, this ideology that gets other folks to be the ones to pull the trigger. And so this is the deep underbelly side of this that we are not paying attention to. And I don't think that our federal government in particular is following those lines in ways that they should and should be much more concerned about.
Yeah. Man, this is a rigorous conversation. Can you all hang out past the break for a few minutes? Rebecca, Azor, and DJ Exclusive are both out. We're going to do a few minutes of Like It or Not, but I want to expand on that conversation. And I need to go plug up my camera. I knew I forgot to do something this morning. So we'll be back. We're going to take a quick break. More of the Benjamin Dixon Morning Show right after this.
Before this ends, you love me and I love you, but butting heads is what we do. Cold-headed, stubborn, wild, crazy lovers. You love me and I love you. Why can't we just match?
Lipsa, good morning.
Why we get so mean, like the match on kerosene.
We've been fighting every day now. It's hard to breathe, yeah, I think you need to break down. I don't know what to say.
Industrial Loss, what's going on, brother? Good morning to you.
This don't feel right. You be going through my phone like trying to find something while you don't trust me. I got this feeling I'll be much better on my own now. There you go with apologies, it's alright. You don't mean it, and I don't wanna try no more now. It's too late. I don't wanna hear you say I'm sorry. It's too late. I don't wanna hear no more excuses. It's alright. See, I'm a walk away 'cause I'd rather be alone now. It's alright.
so much. I appreciate y'all.
Baby, you don't wanna act right. Gave you chance after chance and you blew it. All you wanna do is pick a fight.
Man, I really can do this like all day long. I love this.
Man, always seeing what I don't do. Give you everything I had till it
Today, you see him too today?
I'll be much better on my own.
Ben going 100 miles a minute was typing, looking around, doing everything. Like, damn, that man on it.
I don't wanna try.
LD, I appreciate you. Good morning to you.
I don't wanna hear you say you're sorry. It's too late. I don't wanna hear no more excuses.
Maureen Weber, good morning, Maureen.
See, I'ma walk away 'cause I'd rather be alone now.
Lily, love you too. Ill Hustler, good morning, Ill Hustler. Green, you saw them little fingers was gone, wasn't they?
I got it. Your apologies. It's over, you and me. So say you're sorry. It's too late. I don't wanna hear you say you're sorry. It's too late. I don't wanna hear no more excuses. It's alright. See, I'ma walk away 'cause I'm not alone now.
Oh, brother.
Girl, you better recognize. Looking at me that way, I know what you're thinking. You mad, wanna leave, don't walk out. Round and round we go.
Maureen Weber, I did. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate you.
Kinda hard to stay, but think about everything that we have now. Yeah. Baby, it's too much to lose. Right now, it's hard to see.
Ill Hustler, shout out to you, Ill Hustler. We are love, light, and prayers. Anything that we can do, let us know, all right? You mean it.
Don't go, promise you I'll make it right. Girl, let's just sleep on it for tonight. Let me change your mind. When the morning comes, I wanna wake up with you, 'cause you're the only one I love. Come on now. How could I mess this up? You're the best thing ever happened to me. Girl, I finally see, yeah. I never even knew how much I really need you.
Yeah, y'all please show Ill Hustle some love in the chat room. Lost their father yesterday, so please show some love in the chat room.
We have now. Yeah, baby, it's too much to lose. Right now it's hard to see, girl, just close your eyes and tell me that you will stay tonight. Come on, baby, stay tonight. Don't go, promise you I'll make it right. Girl, let's just sleep on it for tonight. Let me change your mind. When the morning comes, I wanna wake up with you, 'cause you're the only one I love. Come on now, think about everything that we have now. Yeah, baby, it's too much to lose. Right now it's hard to see, girl, just close your eyes and tell me that you will stay tonight. Come on, baby, stay tonight. Don't go, promise you.
Another throwback jam for y'all.
Like It or Not with Benjamin Dixon starts now.
Good morning, and welcome to Like It or Not, where we're free to tell the truth and not care who doesn't like it. I am one of three hosts. Benjamin Dixon, Rebecca Azor, and DJ Exclusive are out. On the screen with me today is none other than investigative journalist Georgia Fort and Pastor Anthony Galloway. They're hanging out past the break. How are the two of you doing this morning? Again, how are you?
Doing well. It's Friday. It's New Year, but it's like, I think 6 inches of snow outside. So,
Yep.
We got a big blizzard last night.
Pastor Galloway, you're talking about shoveling snow last week. And so it's 60 degrees here. So there's not a lick of snow to be seen for probably 100 miles from where I am.
We're in the tundra.
Yeah. It's definitely one to. Yeah, we are getting our Minnesota chops and mussels good and ready. But I'm here for it. I got helpers this time. My kiddos are shovel experts.
I cannot wait to full transparency. My older kids are finally at the age where they can actually handle some responsibilities with excellence. I went in the bathroom. I said, y'all clean this bathroom. It's something about kids getting to the age where they can help. That's just revolutionary, man. So I'm glad you got some backup on shoveling that snow. That's the only.
They're paid backup. Let me be clear. My wife is a union organizer.
I love it.
You know what? I can't be on this show talking about union work all the time and not pay my kids, can I? Yeah.
You can pay them in food.
Well, you know what? I paid them with some pretty good Christmas gifts this year. We'll see about an allowance. Anyway, I have no segue to this next story whatsoever, other than the fact that I absolutely love the Steve Harvey morning show. I grew up on it. As Steve Harvey is Steve Harvey. He's got like 30 dozen jobs, but a talented brother. And in this clip basically this clip is breaking down his position on cancel culture. And the fact that he believes that he can never return to comedy because he would potentially be canceled. Let's take a listen to this clip because I want to really think about this political correctness, cancel culture conundrum that everyone seems to be facing.
Well, comedian Steve Harvey hasn't held back in confirming he won't be able to get back out there as a stand-up comic in this day and age. While on a press tour of his courtroom show, Judge Steve Harvey, the 64-year-old slammed cancel culture. On whether Steve could partake in another comedy special, he claimed it would be impossible right now. The only way I can do one more special is if it's at the end of my television career, because it will end my television career. We're in the cancel culture right now. No stand-up that is sponsor-driven can say anything he wants to. Chris Rock can't, Kevin Hart can't, Cedric the Entertainer can't, D.L. Hewley can't. I can go down the list. The only person that can say what they want to say on stage is Dave Chappelle, because he's not sponsor-driven, he's subscription-driven. Steve Harvey went on to claim political correctness has killed comedy. He told Variety, "If I had tried to continue as a stand-up, there's no way I could maintain it. Political correctness has killed comedy. Every joke you tell now, it hurts somebody's feelings. But what people don't understand about comedians is that a joke has to be about something. It has to be about somebody. We can't write jokes about puppies all the time. The joke can't be about bushes all the time. Some of these jokes will have to be about people because that's the most interesting topic. So if I come back, I'll have to wait until I'm done. And I'm not done. I want to do one more. I'll probably have to call it This Is It."
Yeah. That last line was actually one hell of a marketing. I want to see it. This is it. The final tour of Steve Harvey. I don't want to sandbag the conversation. Pastor
Wasn't
Galloway,
that the name of Michael Jackson's final tour?
Yes.
This is it.
This is it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why it resonated with me so much. Actually, Sister Galloway, look at me messing up here this morning. Sister Ford, what are your thoughts on all of this, but particularly Steve Harvey?
I think it's. Go ahead, Georgia.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that he's speaking truth to power here. We have criticized comedians and politicians alike, but comedians specifically, like Kevin Hart, Dave Chappelle recently, and we've seen these comedians be canceled to some degree for making jokes about the LGBTQ community, making jokes about race, making jokes about, different political issues. They are canceled. They get called out. Kevin Hart lost his opportunity to host one of the biggest award ceremonies in American culture. And so if you are a comedian and you're sitting back on the sidelines and you're watching this play out, it is intimidating to see how critical audiences have become. It's not like the days of Richard Pryor, where you can get up there and the stage as a comedian is a free space, a safe space for you to say anything and for you to make fun of culture in a way that challenges people's belief system. You know, you have to think historically, for especially Black people, the use of comedy was not only our relief, but a place where we could truly poke fun at the things that had been causing us pain, you know, or things that had been happening in our society that we didn't agree on, you know, bring light to some heavy issues that could, in essence, bring clarity. And so comedy has changed. And I do think that we have, we've created this environment where it's impossible for comedians to do their jobs, you know, because we want every space to be politically correct, use the right term, use the right pronouns. And I think that's fine in professional settings. But I think if we really want the art of comedy to do what it was created to do, as a society, we're going to have to step back from some of these false expectations that we've started to put on our comedians. We're ruining the genre. We're killing it.
And that edge, I mean, it takes away that edge that pushes us. And I like what you said about that. You know, I heard you say, you know, speak to comedy, you know, reflecting culture and challenging culture and pushing us to have to think deeper and harder. That's the through line that I see in Richard Pryor and Steve Harvey and things like that. Again, this is the space where there's some nuance, right? When you think of a Chappelle, you think of a Steve Harvey, even D.L. Hewley, right? They would say things on stage that pushed you and they would make you uncomfortable, but it was to get us to the real, right? I'm absolutely, you know, concerned that that's going away and about who is representing the quote unquote cancel culture in that regard. I see a whole lot of folks of color, folks and members of LGBTQ community who are calling attention for accountability because there are ways in which folks will try to exploit identities in order to make a joke, not necessarily to be ironic and push us into a deeper thought space, which is where I put folks like Dave Chappelle, Steve Harvey, D.L. Hewley, and all those kinds of things, right? And so I'm here for the accountability that comes with trying to exploit somebody's identity. But that there's that go too far space, right? That you spoke to, Georgia, where now we can't have any of the deep, nuanced, you know, edge that is hyperbolic and ironic and makes you think differently about something, right? And I think it's a piece of our identity in terms of Black community identity. You know, how many times do folks say something, you know, that to dominant culture sounds bombastic? It sounds, you know, out there. You know, I think of my family from the Virgin Islands and we're out there acting a fool and my titi says, I would beat your head till it's bloody. We know that that's not what that means. But outwardly, somebody tried to call CPS on it for the language that was coming out of there because they didn't understand the context space or weren't willing to for the sake of how they felt, not about trying to understand what's happening here. And so I think Steve Harvey has a really interesting point here. And if we lose this ability, we then have to go back. I mean, how are you going to venerate Betty White and not understand that some of the things that raunchy stuff that she said over time was for the purpose of getting us to think? I mean, you know, some folks call comedians just entertainers and stuff like that. We got to understand that comedians are really highly intelligent philosophers that are giving us stuff back to us. And we are in danger of confusing accountability with canceling.
Yes. Woo. I didn't think I was going to have this conversation so soon. My God. Something told me to call it a day. Don't go. No. Because it's not that I disagree with the two of you, but I do have to. Let's talk about it because I hear what you both are saying. There is, and me of all people, considering my one time I did stand up, it was very painful. It's very cringy, and I hope the video never gets out. Matter of fact, I'm going to put the video out and make my own money off of my own shame. But I pushed the envelope. I pushed the envelope and I was joking about mass shootings. And I was joking about mental health. So I guess I'm not really one to say, come down on a comedian pushing the envelope, right? I don't have much space there. But I guess I do feel differently about Dave Chappelle, because he is a philosopher. That last thing you said, Pastor Galloway, that's the one that got me. Dave Chappelle is so brilliant. He's using a pedagogy. He's using an approach that is rarely seen. I just hate that he wields that irony and that weapon against, a group that, in my opinion, they ain't they're not the power to be spoken truth to. The comedians of old, they would joke about themselves. Like Richard Pryor joked about his own sexuality. He joked about he clowned himself on some of those issues, and then he used his weapon against the system, against everything else. Now he didn't hold any punches with anybody, basically, honestly. Like, Richard Pryor. But I feel, and I want to know what you feel. Do you feel like there's a difference between, or do you parse that difference the same way that I do between using that comic ire towards truly powerful people versus marginalized people?
So I think that's a really excellent point, because the idea of this kind of comedic engagement is that somebody's going to fire back, right? And comedians fire back at each other all the time, and in iron sharpens iron. The challenge here is you're firing back at the group where this adds fire to those who are trying to act out. When we talk about missing and murdered women and folks like that, trans women are assaulted in ways that we aren't even talking about in the way that we need to. So I'm fully in agreement that this didn't help that cause, right? But I think the expectation or the calculation from Dave Chappelle is this is going to be one of those situations where I make this joke here and somebody else makes it back, and the irony of that is what we lean into, and we didn't have to worry necessarily about adding fuel to other people's fire against the community. And that is a concern that I think is absolutely real and needs to be addressed in this example. But, there's a moment in which this goes too far. And my questioning is, are we losing the ability to see the nuance and the irony, even if we don't like it, and say, you know what, that was too far, and you're going to get a boo out of us, and you got to accept the boo. Comedians have to learn to accept the boo every now and then.
I didn't get booed.
But I think
I didn't get booed that night, but I got a pat on the back, which is even worse. I would have rather got booed. But go ahead.
Look, I just think this. I think this is important. This is the important conversation to have. We need to understand that sometimes, there's things that we can go out there and we can't just use the old rules. And so while part of me is like, there's a step too far, part of me is wondering who actually represents the cancel and the cancel culture, because sometimes folks get canceled because they didn't understand the nuance of that. And those folks often don't look like me. Some of the loudest folks that want to cancel somebody, I look up and they're not coming from the communities that are actually receiving the negative service, as you pointed out, for the LGBTQ community. So I think there's that a part of it. And again, I need us to separate accountability from canceling. I don't feel like what was coming at Dave Chappelle was cancel culture. I feel like what was coming at Dave Chappelle in that particular instance was accountability that got co-opted by a cancel, this quote unquote debate around cancel culture.
Man, you better stop bringing all this nuance to this conversation. That's exactly what the hell happened. Preach, Pastor, preach.
And so, and then what happens is what gets drowned out is the accountability that's being sought. They were very clear. Folks in the LGBTQ community, in the trans community, were very clear. They said, this is why that was problematic. And they were specific. That is not the debate that come to the news stories. That is not the debate that ended up in echo chambers and stuff like that. So that's problematic to me. But at the same time, you got folks like, Bill Burr, right? Who's stand up every now and then. I'm like, oh, no, I don't like that at all. But it was funny and it's getting me to think about stuff. And you're willing to have follow-up conversation. So there's that edge that if it's lost, I think we're going to be losing a very important, philosopher's edge that has been part of our community for a long time. And I just think we are stronger and smarter than that. Even though we have to navigate the fact that we've got communities that if we joke and use certain language and stuff like that, we add fuel to a fire against them. I need to be checked all day in that regard of that. But that's accountability. That's not cancel.
Yeah.
Sister Ford.
It boils down to this. We've become a society where if I don't agree with you, I don't think you should have a platform. And what kind of society is that? We should be able to have civil discourse. We should be able to have our own thoughts, beliefs, and ideas. We should be able to share them and not be canceled for it. In order for us to truly understand people who are not like us, we need to be able to hear them in a respectful way, to be able to engage with them, to have those nuanced conversations. And if we take that away, then, are we all supposed to believe the same thing? And so the same people who are doing the canceling, are putting themselves in a position where they could be canceled too, because oftentimes you have marginalized communities. And I'm saying this from a space of being, a biracial Black woman who's a part of some of these spaces. Right. But oftentimes if we're the ones, canceling people for the things that they're saying or doing, what happens when people don't agree with what we're saying or with our beliefs and our values? And so I think that we should foster communities where we can have that nuance, and not in a place, let's separate disagreeing with each other from being violent. That is where, for me, is like we should draw the line. People should be able to disagree and to be able to have that nuance, but we should not foster a society that tolerates violence against things that we don't like. But it's unfortunate that yes, you should be conscious as a comedian of what you're saying when you go out there. You shouldn't just be reckless. You shouldn't be violent even with your words. But a lot of these conversations, even when I look at what Dave Chappelle in his last Netflix stand-up, and all of the criticism that came from that, all of the pressure to cancel him and to pull his deal, there was still at the heart of his conversation something about the way our society has changed in this generation that made us all think, that made us think about the way our society has changed, that made us think about even when you go into a workplace, it is a new practice within this last decade to use your pronouns at school, to use pronouns in workplaces, to use pronouns in other social settings. That was not a practice that happened 10 years ago. Where else are we fostering spaces where we can have conversation about the way our society is changing? And he put that right in front of us. And I'm open to hearing the criticisms of it, but I also think that people should should appreciate the art of what he did in fostering a conversation about the way our society has changed.
I tell you one thing I'd appreciate. I totally, and Pastor Galloway, feel free to get in there because I'm going to get ready to let us get out of here. It's Friday.
Nope, not without the funny clips.
His art form, his skill set. Again, I'm not saying this so much to blow smoke up Dave Chappelle's behind. It's to say I recognize what he's using there, and he is a master philosopher. And there's no doubt about it. I just don't think that I feel that to a certain degree, like Steve Harvey pointed out, with him being protected by a barrier of subscriptions, I don't know that it was fair for him to ever really say that he was ever at risk of being canceled, because it actually increased his worth. But then when one of y'all brought up, the guy who's about my height, he's a little shorter than me, Kevin Hart. He actually, Gary Coleman.
Gary Coleman.
I'm saying Gary Coleman. I hate you, Dwayne. He did lose that gig. Was it the Oscars? It was the Oscars that he lost because he actually was canceled in the exact way that Steve Harvey said. So listening to Steve Harvey, there is a difference. When you have a subscription-based system, you have a barrier of protection. Pastor Galloway.
Well, Kevin Hart, I think that example is part of where I think we get into some really, really specific places. I'll never forget Ellen being like, why are you going to quit? On the Ellen show when she was having that conversation with Kevin Hart, and he was like, no, because I'm not about to get in there. He said, I'd already dealt with that, because the thing that was being brought up was not only years ago, but then you can't have any understanding for the growth from that, and he's already addressed that. That is an old thing that wasn't even at issue right now. At least Dave Chappelle's situation was about something that happened right now. Somebody's bringing up old stuff for Kevin Hart. He's already addressed it, already spoken to it, and then and so folks were willing and starting to say, you know what, that's a good point. We want to still move forward, and then he said, no, I ain't going to do it. Yeah. Because you got to understand that there's going to be consequences. So I actually commend the choice to, and I don't, he wasn't fired, right? He decided not to do it. And I think that's an important stand that he took in there. And I think it actually was part of what Steve Harvey was alluding to, and that is the difficulty now of having to find a new way to navigate. I think I also want to put onto the table, though, that there has to be some growth and learning on the part of folks who were big in one era, but our era is shifting. Our minds are shifting, the culture is shifting, and we've got to stay ahead of that too. And so part of this might be trying to figure out a new way to engage in this and what is going to be funny now. Look, what was funny to us
that's a good point.
is still there, still masterful, all those kinds of things, right? But there's also a space where we got to figure out how to be funny in the new era. And some of our comics did it. Look at Red Fox. Red Fox stayed funny over multiple shifts in culture, in psyche, in zeitgeist, and he figured out how to do it. Some of these great, you brought up Richard Pryor earlier. Richard Pryor did the same thing, right? And so,
but it was
a part of that,
at a different time too, though, when they were allowed to be free and they didn't have to worry about all of that public backlash because people respected the stage. And, with Kevin Hart, he was given an ultimatum. They pushed his back against the wall and he made a decision for himself. So in some regards, no, he wasn't fired. But at the same time, like, he was given an ultimatum, and that by itself, it showed that the system, the Oscars, was taking a side on the issue and that they were listening to the public and that they were siding with the public and that, that there is some power. But you asked a very pertinent question earlier, Anthony. You said, who is doing the canceling and why?
Yes.
Right. And we should remember that, because whoever is behind the canceling is removing our ability to have this nuance. And from a religious standpoint, even a lot of the principles and the values that are withheld in one religion, you will find in many of the religions. And so in that commonality, what we're seeing in modern society, in American society, is a lot of those religious values are being pushed further and further away from the things that we're allowed to see on TV, from the things that are allowed to happen in classrooms, from the things that are allowed to happen in workplaces. And so from a spiritual standpoint, even what is the spiritual condition and health of our nation at this time, and so there, I don't know. I think that we should encourage nuanced conversations. I think that people should be able to have freedom of speech. And in one regard, we foster that. And then when it comes to our comedians, we say, oh, no, because if you look at some of the things that these artists are doing nowadays, I mean, they're pushing the envelope about what should be appropriate for the mass public to see. Right. They're pushing the envelope. And I'm not saying anything is right or that it's wrong. I'm just saying they are given the stage to utilize freedom of speech. But when it comes to our Black comedians specifically, we hold them to a different standard. And so I feel like there is some hypocrisy that is happening in the standards that are being put forth, and that we should equal the playing field, that our Black comedians should be allowed to push the envelope and make people think, because what we have seen is good things come from it. And, the last thing that I'll say here is, we're just in an interesting time. We're in a very interesting time. And as I reflect back on Mad TV specifically, I don't know how many of you grew up watching Mad TV.
I grew up on that. Yes.
But it was hilarious at times. And as I look back at some of those skits and even characters, my God, how did that show not get canceled? How did that show stay around as long as it did? And that is, you can point to just that one character, or even Stewart.
Yeah.
Stewart was clearly a child on the autism spectrum, or someone struggling with mental health issues. There is absolutely no way that a comedian in this climate could poke fun at somebody on the autism spectrum or having mental health issues without being canceled. But this was a character that was allowed to exist for years and years and years. And the same thing with Miss Swan. When somebody posted, an Asian friend of mine posted a meme of Miss Swan, and I felt so guilty about all the times that I had laughed at that character in my own ignorance of how offensive that character had been to her culture. Right. But it also opened up the door to white audiences being able to confront their own stereotypes about that community. And I do think that there was some good that came from that nuance, from white audiences having to confront their own stereotypes. So I don't know. There's clearly two sides to this issue. And
now there's a whole spectrum to this one. Y'all got
let me back your play. I think
here for real.
One of the things that you got me thinking about is now there's an exemplar pumping into my head. Go to the first episode of Saturday Night Live, which opens with George Carlin's stand-up, and it's an extended monologue. It takes some time, right? And he hosts through a comedic monologue that I think demonstrates exactly what you were talking about, Georgia, because he goes in a way that you had never seen on TV before that point, and in this particular stage. And looking at George Carlin's the first episode of Saturday Night Live versus what we see now. You see a very stark difference in terms of edge and in terms of willingness to kind of go to some of those places. And to your point, George Carlin gets held up as the genius for doing exactly what we've seen all these Black comedians do throughout all of this time. And so that different standard racially. And again, this is also what Dave Chappelle was talking about. He's like, there's certain folks who are speaking for a community that don't represent everybody. Stonewall was Black trans women. Let me be clear. So there's I see your point, Sister Georgia, and it's making me think about all of the double standards that we've seen all throughout this history. That if we continue that trend, would take the edge off of folks who get us to chew on things in a different way. There's the political conversations we have, there's the news conversations that we have, but then there's the barbershop conversations and the church basement conversations and the friends sitting around the living room conversations. And we need things that speak to us on multiple levels, and we tie our arms and our hands up if we don't push those edges and be willing to say, all right, yeah, I can see your point. You didn't like that. Cool. But what is the conversation that's happening now as a result? I think what you pulled out there is huge. And I think that first episode of Saturday Night Live versus recent ones is a good example of how we, some of the ways in which we've shifted.
And to that point, think about this, right? Dave Chappelle's stand-up, it sparked a conversation that something he did or said was problematic for members of the LGBTQ community. Well, guess what? If you're not a part of the LGBTQ community, you need to be educated on why that's problematic. We're all learning. Right. And that is a community that is also growing and changing, because 10 years ago, it was the LGBT community. And we've since that community has expanded. And so I appreciate having conversations, even if it's conversations saying, hey, I didn't like that. It was problematic. It was insulting. It was offensive, because now I'm equipped when I go into community that has inclusive spaces, which I'm often in, and I value being in, and I'm happy to be in. in, but I don't know. I'm not coming from the lens of understanding what's insulting or what's offensive. And so instead of canceling something that raises a conversation, that sparks a conversation of saying, hey, that's problematic, it's insulting, why don't we use it as a launching pad to have the conversation and educate people who are outside of your community on ways to have relationship with you that feels good and that you value and that you appreciate. I think we're failing to find the silver lining in things that are uncomfortable or that we don't agree with, rather than pointing to something and saying, I didn't like the way that felt, but let me use it as a tool, as a way to have this conversation and educate broader society about how to engage with my community in a way that builds rather than tears down.
You can pass the collection plate on that one. I'm with you.
Well, yeah, I wanted to give space to let that resonate. I would just say this. The only other thing that I would add to this conversation is just something for me personally. There's nuance in there's nuance in the conversation that we just had that's worthwhile having and parsing and going even further into. But for me personally, if I have, and I like to think that I do, had the philosophical skill set that Dave Chappelle had, forget about the comedic skill set, because Dave Chappelle is a mastermind. I would say he's one of the highest order thinkers because of how he interweaves those tapestries and then makes you forget that he's talking about something, and then wham, at the end, he brings it all together. I mean, game recognized games. A lot of good preachers do that. The thing is, if I had that skill set, I wouldn't wield it against a community that, while that conversation is, there are nuances to be had in that conversation. I just see so many bigger targets that need to be fully assaulted with that skill set. Like, I don't think, for instance, let me give you this example. All these people, and there's a correlation between political ideology and the divide on this debate. It's not one for one, but there's a pretty decent overlap. If you're conservative, you lean on this side of the conversation. If you're liberal, you lean more on this side of the conversation as it pertains to Dave Chappelle, right? So I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but it is a decent shorthand. In conservative circles, they are all for Dave Chappelle. They're all for it under the context of free speech and everything that we've talked about this morning. We want to make sure that he has a right to tell jokes and be edgy and all those kinds of things. I doubt very seriously that they would be saying the same things once I go on my comedic tour joking about how many Republicans have died from COVID-19, right? When I joke about Herman Cain, right? When I joke about something that I'm doing in a sense of irony, cruel irony, but to bring attention to a very serious issue in this country, those same people will fall underneath the pressure of their hypocrisy and all of a sudden want to say that I've gone a bridge too far when I use my power to attack power versus using my power to attack the powerless. That's kind of, and I would love to hear what either one of you think about that, because it's not so much an assertion as a confession of where I stand.
So there's a lot there. The first piece comes into what was actually said or done on that space, and one of the things that friends in my community, in trans community spaces where we're speaking to, is there's a fight for folks to understand their identity is valid, and that this could be used by folks to fuel the fire that tries to invalidate that thing, right? That, to the point Georgia was making earlier, that's a space where now we now can be enlightened upon that because it came up in this space, right? And it's challenging.
Right.
But there's also the point that was made around who is perpetuating some of the who gets credit, for identity space. And we've had long conversations about, in every intersection, there is disparity racially. And so, there has been deference to white folks in all of these intersections. And I think that's a very important piece that Dave Chappelle was trying to put forward here and to get us to think about is the fact that, you can feel good and pat yourself on the back about being, in support of a particular intersection or identity intersection, stuff like that. But are you still being real about the fact that in any of these intersections, Black and Indigenous folks still continue to receive way negative outcomes in their white peers, right? That's a deep conversation that is in the literature, that is in conversation, but we don't get there, because we're stuck in one particular area. And I think it's important to set some other context here too. And I'm not just saying this because I'm an AME pastor, well, partly, but Dave Chappelle is named for his grandfather, who was an AME bishop and known as an educationalist that pushed the edge to get folks to think deeper. I mean, he's got philosophical family roots. And so, I think we need to use this. We need to do what Georgia has asked us to do and do a call out, to use these opportunities to grow in our nuance. And to me, if we were to do that, I think we would get even funnier jokes and more interesting nuanced edge. But if we don't have the ability to do that, I'm concerned that we're going to end up with milquetoast vanilla comedy that ain't really funny, and that's problematic, right? If nobody's pushing an envelope,
we have an epidemic of that, right? Let's be sure, because you're talking about Saturday Night Live. I don't think there's a better example of what you just described than Saturday Night Live. But I'm sorry, continue.
No, that was it. Just I'm listening to what you said, Georgia, and it's got me looking at where are the edges that are going to push our thinking deeper. And as we move through society, that has to change, right? What was edgy and I'll give one example, right? So you look at King. We're coming up on the King holiday, and everybody's talking about, everybody likes to put forward this kind of vanilla, hand in hand, all love King, which is a part of it. He was a theologian. That was definitely a part of the theological bit that he was pushing forward. Love, nonviolence. I get that, right? And also, we put that forward, and we don't put forward the King that's like the check has come back marked insufficient funds. Why we can't wait King. Getting punched in Selma and stopping somebody, not because he didn't support somebody getting tuned up for putting their hands on him, but because he realized that was the evidence he needed to make that make Selma the site to do the strategic work that was happening there. We forget that when King died, he was persona non grata across the United States because he was pushing towards the economic equity conversation. And so we put that down, and if we lose that edge, then we lose all the things that actually made that history what it was to look back on. And if we get rid of that in this current context, we get rid of the edges. We are looking at a future where we don't see change happens. Georgia, I'm gonna get in trouble, so I'm gonna need your backup when I get back to Minnesota with this. We get change when things happen. We in Minnesota, people didn't realize that there was Black folks in Minnesota until the unrest hit the ground and precinct burned down, right? And all of a sudden, folks are go, "Whoa, that's how far this could go." And for all the reasons and thoughts around that, a whole lot of change is now a lot of conversation had to be had. A whole lot of different thinking had to come forward because we saw how far that could go. Now. I also remember at the same time having a conversation with an older woman in part of the holding spaces. And she said, and she was traumatized by all the things that was going down. But she said in all the unrest since George Floyd was killed, that was the first night that she slept calmly. Because she and all of her sons and nephews and all of that who have been harassed by that particular police precinct for years and years and years. Look, I'm a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. I was peacocking, walking through that area with my Letterman jacket on, my crimson and cream, got my slacks on, and I had a group of OGs roll through, and I'm like, shoot, I'm wearing red in this territory. This is going to be a problem. And all of a sudden, they look out and they said, "That's right, get your education, young blood. Get your education, homie." And I got shouted out, and I felt good, right? A block and a half away, I get assaulted by 3rd Precinct officers who said I fit the bill for a robbery. I'm listening to the description: light skin, afro, blue down coat. I'm wearing a Kappa Alpha Psi Letterman's jacket. What is the world coming to when folks on the street can recognize I'm a collegiate person, but my police force that's supposed to protect me cannot? So when we get to the conversation about the 3rd Precinct coming down, she says that's the first night I slept. because I felt like I didn't have to worry about that for at least a little bit. Like, these are the deep conversations and nuance and edges that we need to be focused on. And instead, one of the concerns about and it's not cancel culture. I think there's again, I said the separation from accountability and cancel, but there's a whole space of folks who are in this kind of cancel culture mindset, not because there's something real to hold accountable to, but because it's become cool to be on that side of things. And oftentimes when I look at the sea of folks who are taking that up, they don't look like me. And that's a problematic space for me.
Control. And I don't know at what point, you might have already said this at the very beginning of this conversation, Georgia, but when they seize the conversation, they seize the narrative, and we're unable to go any further than the blockage of a quote unquote cancellation conversation, because it's been seized. The conversation has been seized, and we're now paralyzed from going any further into some nuance. Georgia, I don't know if you have a last word to get in here. I really didn't mean for us to talk about this for 15 minutes, and the producer laughing at me in Slack saying, yeah, right, I guess I should have known better. Get the last word.
Well, okay, first of all, my hope for this conversation is none of us are canceled.
Well, listen, here's a good thing
for having a conversation about being canceled. So I'll just throw that out there.
That's real meta.
When you think too, like, as a Black woman, do you know how many times I turn on the TV and I'm offended by the way that Black women are objectified sexually, or the way that we're presented as angry or poor or single mothers? Like, there's been so many times I have been offended, but instead of trying to cancel something, again, I try to see the silver line and use those opportunities or use that common intersection. If other people are watching the same thing I'm watching that offends me or insults me, then that can be a launching pad for us to have a deeper conversation. Sometimes those conversations lead to understanding, and sometimes they don't. And that is okay. We, in order to grow, in order for us to move forward together, we have to start to get to a place where we are okay with sometimes not agreeing. We're not going to see eye to eye on everything. Do you know in Minnesota, after George Floyd was murdered, how many Christians and Muslims we saw standing in solidarity to move the work forward? You're not always going to agree on everything. And I think for me, to see people from different faith walks come and work in solidarity for a common cause, if people who believe in different gods can set aside their differences and work together, how is it so hard for people who have different political views to come and set aside their differences to work together? Why is it hard for people who have different sexual identities to set aside their differences and work together? And so I think that if we don't internalize and process how our society is evolving to a place where we discourage people from having differences, that's what's contributing to the further polarization and silos that our nation has. It's further, people always point to, it's the race divide. No, it's just the divide of us not being able to agree that we're not going to agree on everything, And so I just hope that we can utilize the different entertainment that's put in front of us for the purposes of growth and deeper understanding, as opposed to division and canceling people who are really just trying to get us to think.
Well, I'm going to call it there. Because, we only got 6 minutes left. We end up going the entire hour on this topic. It's been a long time since we actually fleshed out a conversation this fully. And that's good. And that's okay, because, it's the Benjamin Dixon Morning Show. I want everyone to have a great weekend. Pastor Galloway, thank you again for hanging out with us this long. Georgia Ford, thank you so much for coming in on your day off. Shout out to DJ Exclusive and Rebecca Azor. We'll all be back on Tuesday. Monday, we are off. We'll see you after the weekend.
I could really use a change of scenery. Yeah. Everybody smoking all the greenery. Yeah. Close the match 'cause they were handed down to me. But I'm still fly, I know. I'm still fly, let's go. It could all be worse, I could be a hater like you. It could all be worse. Pills to make the man, but that poison's gonna kill you. From the inside out. So right now, say it with your chest now, say it with your chest now. I'm young, I'm free, can't nobody take me here and now. It's my time to run it out. It's my time to ride it. I'm young, I'm free, can't nobody take me here and now. It's my time to run it out. It's my time to ride it out. It's your time. Oh. Cheers to all the haters, 'cause you proved to me that rising to the top was my destiny. And you can see whatever from behind me, but I'm still fly, I know. I'm still fly, let's go. It could all be worse, I could be a hater like you. It could all be worse. Clothes to make the man, but that poison's gonna kill you. From the inside out, it's time to say it with your chest now, say it with your chest now. I'm young, I'm free, can't nobody take me here and now. It's my time to run it out. It's my time to ride it. I'm young, I'm free, can't nobody take me here and now. It's my time to run it out. It's my time to ride it out. It's your time. Oh, if you're on the bus, say yeah. If you're on the train, say yeah. If you